You're listening to the Chronicles of a Gooner, the Arsenal podcast.
I'm Martin Tyler, and you're listening to Harry Symeou.
Hello and welcome back to the Chronicles of a Gooner, the Arsenal podcast, part of the 90 Min Football Network. As ever, I'm your host, Harry Symeou, and I'm joined by two brilliant guests. First of all, welcome back to the show, Metro Sports, Mike Stavrou. How you doing, sir?
Hello, mate. I'm very well, thank you. Reaching that point of the transfer window, we're just talking about off-air. Arsenal linked with anyone and everyone. So we're going to get Jonas's expert insight into a few of these La Liga players that we're being linked with.
Absolutely. Another day and another 1,296 players that Arsenal have been linked with. Well, let's also welcome to the show La Liga expert and very, very good friend of the show, Jonas Yever. Welcome back, mate. It's been a while. How you been?
I've been good. Thank you for having me back. I think since the last time I was on, you've actually managed to attain a Norwegian player in your squad at Arsenal. So that's a nice upgrade, I suppose. So yeah, Norwegians participating in every sense of the word, and in terms of both discussing and giving things to discuss in relation to Arsenal.
Absolutely, of course. I think the last time we did speak was with regards to Martin Odegaard and what was happening with that and how that was progressing along the line. And lo and behold, he's an Arsenal player now on a permanent basis, which we're all delighted about given his performances. I'll give you an opportunity to wax lyrical about Martin a little bit later on, because I'm sure you'd welcome that. But first of all, Jonas, we wanted to get your thoughts on some of the players that Arsenal are being linked with at the moment. Now, we know that Dusan Vlahovic was the primary target in terms of a striker. We know that a deal has been agreed now between Juventus and Fiorentina that will see the player make that move. It's the move that he wants. It's the move he's always wanted by all accounts. So Arsenal have had to turn their attention elsewhere. And one of the players that we're being heavily linked with is Real Sociedad's Alexander Isak, a player who impressed a lot of people at the Euros, but it's fair to say, Jonas, hasn't had a great season this time around.
No, he hasn't. A little bit strange, actually, in relation to Alexander Isak, because he's shown glimpses of his brilliance. But I mean, if you look at Real Sociedad as a whole, I mean, they're not scoring a lot of goals, are they? I mean, I think they've had in La Liga this season, I think they've scored, could it be 22 goals, something along those lines? Both the Basque sides, both Athletic and Real Sociedad have scored, very few goals. And I believe it's been Mikel Oyarzabal who scored the majority of those goals for Real Sociedad, and most of them have been penalties, or a lot of them have been penalties. So they're struggling to get goals. Isak has been playing at times in a 2 up front, sometimes alone in a 4-3-3, and I'm not sure that suits him all the time. He's very good at stretching the opposition line. I mean, he's very good at dragging defenders along and isolating them one-on-one, and sometimes he gets a little bit out on the left or out on the right, so it doesn't exactly have the greatest of scoring opportunities. So not sure if they've been able to find the best role for him this season, and considering the fact that they have someone like Mikel Oyarzabal who's so good in front of the box as well, so good at creating chances for himself. You have someone like, obviously, like David Silva, who needs a lot of space as well. I mean, he's not necessarily been that number 9 that you kind of expect him to be in a team like Real Sociedad. But that's also to his credit. I mean, he's able to do a lot of things. So I mean, in a way, you could kind of, if you want your headline, you could say that he's sort of the poor man's Karim Benzema, in that he can do a lot of things, and at times he's the one that has to sacrifice goals for the greater good of his team.
That's a great headline. I'm definitely writing that down. Definitely going to use it. Mike, the price being talked about with somebody like Alexander Isak is obviously quite significant. We're talking about a rumored 90 million euro release clause. I mean, we don't know as much as Jonas does about the player, but what's your initial thoughts on the idea of Alexander Isak, and bearing in mind the level of investment it would require to get him in the door?
Yeah, so for me, I think when we were looking at strikers that we were being linked with earlier in the transfer window, obviously Vlahovic was the standout guy. But although I thought that was a deal that maybe could have happened, especially on Fiorentina and Arsenal's end, because I think those were Arsenal especially were pushing for it. I think Fiorentina looked like they were open to it at one stage. It was just the player obviously had ambitions to go to Juve. But when we're looking at sort of profiles of striker, Vlahovic was very much a target man, very much the sort of guy that is going to bang in the goals, but maybe won't add that much to the build-up play. Maybe he's not refined his sort of technical skills on the ball. Maybe isn't that sort of player that could create chances for himself. And it's interesting to hear Jonas talk then. He's saying that Isak is a player that can create chances for himself. He's got, a lot of tools to his game. And I sort of think if I'm looking at the sort of striker that would fit into Arsenal's system, that Isak might be more well equipped to that. Obviously, the thing is that he's had a good season last season, but this season he's not really lived up to it. And it's the adaptation period from coming from La Liga to the Premier League. How long would that take? I think that would be my reservation. But I'd just like to throw it back to Jonas and just ask him, you spoke about his sort of skill set. If you look at him in sort of like Mikel Arteta team where we play one striker centrally and he sort of, needs to do a little bit more in terms of dropping deep and also goal scoring, which is quite a big role for a player like that. Do you think he could is a sort of player that could fit into that sort of role?
I think in some aspects he'd fit better than Vlahovic in terms of being able to link up the play. I haven't seen Vlahovic as much as I've seen Alexander Isak, but he's been extremely good at linking up play and also playing with this with his back towards goal. I mean, that's an underrated point of his game. Also, a fact, considering the fact that we did mention him earlier, he does have a great relation with Martin Ødegaard. So obviously, those are players that are played together at Real Sociedad, and obviously they shared an off the field relationship as well. So if he needs to adapt, he'll have the perfect guy next to him in terms of someone who could help usher him into the system. We've already seen how Ødegaard has been given a prominent role at Arsenal. So I would expect I wouldn't expect a great adaptation period for someone like Alexander Isak if they were to go and get him. But then again, I think he's a player that kind of fits a team more so than Vlahovic, who's in my estimation seems to be someone who has had the whole team built around him. It's quite obvious that Alexander Isak hasn't had the team built around him at Real Sociedad, nor has he demanded that, because he's so able to fit into other pieces. So I think that if you're looking for more of a well-rounded player, someone who can do a lot more in terms of build-up play, in terms of finishing, because he's a great finisher as well, don't get me wrong. But I think that he's able to adapt into something more than just being a number 9 who's chasing the goal. But then again, it all depends on what's being asked of him. So yeah, I think looking at Alexander Isak, I think he'd be a good fit at Arsenal actually.
Just a couple of things, Jonas. So first of all, the price tag, right? The minimum fee release clause apparently set at 90 million euros. Just to make it clear for our listeners, that doesn't mean that Arsenal have to pay 90 million euros. That means that's the figure that Real Sociedad would have no choice in accepting, basically, right?
Yeah, in Spanish law or workman's law, I suppose it is, everyone has a buyout clause. So that means that if you work in a supermarket or the post office, you'll, in theory, have a buyout clause. This becomes a bigger thing with footballers, obviously, because there's more of a buy and trade thing in terms of football. So that's why whenever a player signs for a Spanish club, under Spanish law, he has to have a buyout clause, which the player and the club usually agree on. I don't think there's ever been I've heard about agreements or sort of disagreements rather in contract negotiations regarding buyout clauses. But yeah, I mean, it's a high clause, and that's sort of what Real Sociedad has done probably in order to defend themselves against clubs such as Arsenal and other clubs that might come and want him because he's such a great talent. So that is probably that's probably the sum in which they'd say, okay, fine, we would accept that regardless. But I'm going to assume that they'd be able to negotiate a fee lower. But when they're looking at, I mean, if Vlahovic is going for 75 million euros, I mean, I think Real Sociedad wouldn't budge unless there's a bit of, somewhere between 60 and 70, I'd imagine anyways.
What would you say to those Arsenal fans that are concerned by the fact that his goal tally this season has not been very impressive? He did prove last season, didn't he, that he can score goals with regularity. Does this feel like a blip rather than a reflection of what the player is actually like?
wouldn't say it's a blip either. I mean, I'd say more so the fact that he's been able to contribute to the team in other aspects. I mean, he's someone who doesn't always play as a number 9. He drifts out wide. He's able to put in crosses. He's able to isolate opponents for other players to gain space. He's more of a team player than perhaps he's given credit for, because strikers nowadays are judged on goals and assists. I believe Karim Benzema had a brilliant interview in France Football in this, and that we focus a lot on goals and assists in our estimation of players. And Alexander Isak might fall victim to that this season. But I mean, if you look at previous seasons and how he's done, for example, for the Swedish national team, I think he's proven without a shadow of a doubt that he's able to do that. But he's just not been asked to do that all the time, it seems. So I think we're looking at a striker who is able to do a lot of different things and should be judged more upon that, more so than just upon goals and assists.
Brilliant stuff. Let's move on to Luka Jovic, another player that Arsenal are being rumoured to be interested in, another one in the long list. And apparently, with regards to Luka Jovic, this would be a loan deal that would see him come to the club. What's your take on Luka Jovic? Because he really did pull up trees in the Bundesliga, got this move. But at Real Madrid, it's fair to say it hasn't always worked out.
Too big of a stage. I think it's just a stage that's been too big for him, and he doesn't. At times, doesn't seem that he's taking it seriously either. You know, it's a really weird situation with Luka Jovic, because it's been like every other week he's been out with COVID. Every other week he's been out with something off the field. Every other week there's been some sort of controversy with him. Whenever he's given a chance, I mean, he's not grabbed that chance, and not for nothing. I mean, he plays second fiddle to Karim Benzema. It's difficult to do that, and I understand. But he seems like a player who needs, I suppose, to have that feeling with the manager, you know, that he's been given that undivided attention and undivided love, and that's difficult at a club like Real Madrid. And you've seen that also with, I go back to him, but I mean Martin Ødegaard as well. You've seen that when he's playing and he's been given chance after chance after chance after chance with Mikel Arteta. Of course, he was going to break through and become an influential player. I think that there's a little bit of a difference with Luka Jovic and Martin Ødegaard, and that Luka Jovic just doesn't seem to be set. It just doesn't seem to be content with anything or that he's given. So I'm not sure if he's a player that would be more of a big figure. I mean, he seems to have a big ego, I suppose, and I'm not sure if that would fit in that well with Arsenal, considering the fact that they already have a striker who has a big ego who they're trying to offload. So I'm not sure if Luka Jovic is a good fit. But then again, we haven't seen that much of him, so it's difficult to sort of even now, even still, the judgment is still out on him, because we've there's been no long list of games to look upon, and whenever he's given a chance, he's basically flunked it most times.
Yeah, and Mike, I'll throw this to you. You know, Jonas makes a great point. You know, we look at all the issues that Mikel Arteta has had with, let's say, that type of character. When you hear that from Jonas, does it cause concern for you with regards to how well he would fit in at Arsenal?
Yeah, there's definitely a load of red flags from what Jonas was saying, because I think what Arteta has tried to do from day one is just bring in his sort of, basically what he wants everyone to follow, his own rule book. And when players haven't lived up to that, you got your Matteo Guendouzi's, Aubameyang, they're out essentially. So that's the last thing you sort of want is to upset or potentially upset a dressing room, especially when it is going so well and they're sort of all singing from the same hymn sheet. But I think sometimes it is worth a risk. I mean, obviously Jovic, if he did come to Arsenal for on loan, I reckon he would get the chance. And I reckon Arteta would be the kind of manager I'd say, look, we've got you here for a few months. I'm going to put the arm around you and give you the sort of support that you need. This is your opportunity to show Real Madrid fans, to show fans of football around the world what you can do. And it's up to you. I don't know if it would make sense for him to come here and sulk and really not give it his 100%, because ultimately he could be quite happy to stay at Real Madrid and not really play and just sort of get through it, because I'm sure he's on a pretty healthy wage over there. So really it's down to the player and down to what he wants. And us, really, we just need it to work for us in terms of getting us through and to the end of the season. We need someone who's going to basically fill in for Lacazette, who's not really scoring the goals at the moment, and try and fire us into the top four. So if Jovic has the capabilities to do that. And judging by previous seasons, Frankfurt, you mentioned Harry, the season before he joined Real Madrid, he had played an absolute blinder that season. If he can sort of replicate that, given the opportunity to do so, then it might be worth a risk, but we'll have to see.
Yeah, completely agree. I guess the plus side of this potential deal from an Arsenal perspective is that it means we get somebody in to help out. And if it is a loan deal, we're not committing huge amounts of money and then wanting to change that player up top 3-6 months down the line. It's a short-term fix. Jonas, just before I let you go, mate, because I know you're pushed for time, one final player that Arsenal are being talked about with regards to a potential transfer is Espanyol's Raul de Tomas. Not a player that's been on people's radar for a while. He's kind of burst onto the scene. Tell us a little bit about him.
Burst onto the scene. I mean, he's been a player who's sort of performed for lesser clubs, I suppose. He was fantastic at Rayo Vallecano a couple of years ago, and he sort of had he was somewhat decent, I suppose, at Benfica, and then he's always been sort of attached to Real Madrid. Once he's gone to Espanyol, he's sort of been able to become his own master, I suppose. I mean, he's a guy who seems very flamboyant in a way because, for example, he plays with the shirt name RDT. So, I mean, he kind of lends credence to what sort of character he is. But he's a hitman. He's an absolute revolver man in front of the goal. I mean, he's fantastic to watch. He's more so of a old school number 9, but then again, he's also able to sort of drift out wide. You saw him especially for the Spanish national team, in which he kind of played a hybrid role of being an inside attacker and number 9 at the same time. But he's someone who will be lurking in and around the box at all times and sort of be on the shoulder of the last defender. He is really a character when you look at him with his slick hair and tan, and he used to have a small mustache as well. So he used to look like one of those Western villains that you used to watch in old Western movies. I mean, he's such a character, and at the same time, he also talks about he loves meditation and all that sort of stuff. So he is something else, and he is something else also on the pitch. I mean, he's lethal with his left foot, right foot, headers. I mean, he doesn't take that many touches on the ball inside the box. He kind of tries to bang him in. But, I mean, he is an absolute rifleman in front of the goal.
Interesting stuff. When I talk about this guy, or when I hear people talk about this guy, or when I think of the potential of him coming to Arsenal, I get massive Lucas Perez vibes. That's what I kind of that's where my mind goes. Playing for a La Liga side that maybe aren't as fashionable as some of the big ones, and a potential transfer. But yeah, not sure. But that's based on not seeing him a lot.
I see the comparison, but I'd say that Raul de Tomas is a bit more complete in the way he plays. He's a good link-up attacker as well in some aspects, even though I sort of view him more as a classic number 9. If you look at the standings, the top scorer standings in La Liga, and if I'm correct, Benzema is number 1, and then you have 3 players, I believe, who shares the second spot with 12 goals, which is Vinicius Jr., obviously, who's been fantastic this season. It's Juanmi, who plays for Betis, and it's Raul de Tomas. And the only player who was in the lower part of the league, I mean, under the 10th spot, is Raul de Tomas, because I believe Espanyol are 12th or 13th, if I'm not mistaken, whereas everyone else, I mean, Real Madrid and Real Betis are both in Champions League spots. So that sort of tells you that he's able to perform for teams that are not necessarily performing as well as they perhaps should. Not to say that Arsenal aren't doing that, but I think that if he plays for a team that's even better with better players around him, lo and behold, he might perform even better. I mean, he might crumble under the pressure as well. But then again, he's sort of a player he's been around the block a couple of times now. I mean, he's been at Rayo, he's been at Benfica, he's been at Espanyol. He used to be at Real Madrid as well. I mean, he's a player that you sort of expect would deliver if he was given a chance at a bigger club. And I think I was always thinking, the next tier in Spain for him would have been the likes of Sevilla. And I don't think there's that much difference in level at the moment between Sevilla and Arsenal. So that might also be a pretty interesting move for him if he was to be given that.
Yeah, great points. Great points indeed. Jonas, thank you so much, mate. I know you've got a dash, but thank you for joining us. Thank you for your expert insight. It's always a pleasure. Let people know how they can follow you and keep up to date with the great work that you do.
I've done everyone a favor because every time I try to spell out my username on Twitter, it's usually quite difficult. So I've written it under my name. So it's Che Guevara on Twitter, and I mean my work is primarily there. I primarily tweet in English about La Liga, and I also have a podcast about La Liga in Norwegian. And I'm expecting no one to listen to that except perhaps the Norwegian contingency who might be watching this. So yeah, follow me on Twitter and perhaps enjoy some of my fine work, I suppose.
Make sure you do. Make sure you check out Jonas on social media and keep up to date with all his great work. Jonas, thank you so much, mate.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Cheers.
That was the brilliant Jonas Yeva. Lots of great insight there. Always great to hear from Jonas on all things Spanish football. Let's just quickly dive into the comment section. I got to pick up this super chat from Wayne, who says, Harry, where did you get that cap? I've been looking for one just like that for a while and I can't find it. I got it from the Arsenal shop. I got it from the Armory. I got it in black. I got it in blue. And I got it in grey as well. So you can find them in there. Yeah, I went big. You know what it's for, Mike? It's for the bad headaches. It's for those days where you can't be bothered to sort your hair out, but you got to do a live stream. That's what it's all about. But thank you, Wayne, for that kind super chat donation, mate. Very, very much appreciated in there. And yeah, if you're not going to get to the Arsenal shop anytime soon, let me know and we'll sort something out. Right, Mike, some great insight from Jonas on those players. Let's rewind and go back to the Vlahovic stuff. I didn't want to use Jonas's time on that because his expertise are in La Liga, and it was important to me that we got that sort of download. But let's take a step back and go to the Vlahovic thing, because it felt like there was a possibility Arsenal could get this deal done. Although, in fairness, there were noises coming out of Italy from quite early on in the window that his preference was Juventus. So we can't be surprised, can we, that it's worked out the way it has?
I am surprised, you know. I am surprised. I mean, if the reports are to be believed, and we were really going after this guy, he was our top target. You know, we were willing to put up a lot of money for him. We liked the profile, we liked the player, we liked what he's been doing. I would have thought that the club would have, you know, maybe reached out to his representatives to, you know, informally, obviously, to get sort of taste of where his head was at before they started going and really trying to get him, because it sounds like nothing that I read that I can remember ever gave me the indication that Vlahovic wanted to come to Arsenal. I never sort of read an article that said, you know, Vlahovic is keen on the move, or Vlahovic would be open to the move, or I never got that vibe. It was a lot of people were saying from the very beginning he wants to play for a Champions League club, and given where we are at the moment, there's absolutely no guarantee that we will be getting into the Champions League. So in a sense, I'm sort of surprised at the sort of reports that came out, because it was like we were chasing this guy a lot, but was it ever really on the cards? Because at the end of the day, if you can't convince the player while he's under contract, then you've got no leg to stand on. The way it works is the player obviously has to push for the move while he's still under contract, and then the club will sort of sanction it. And just the way that Fiorentina were coming out and talking about it and saying, you know, there's been no contact between the representatives. You know, we've had interest from clubs abroad, but there's no movement. Essentially, it's like they were throwing it to them to sort of push them into action, which is actually quite strange and unusual to see. But obviously, it all makes sense now. It looks like he's going to go to Juventus. It's probably the move that he wanted. And to me, I'm sort of like, if he didn't want to come, well, maybe we've dodged a bullet in a sense, because you don't want a player that's sort of settling, do you?
Yeah, I completely agree. It's a weird one as well. That's what I'm not surprised that he's chosen Juventus, because of that Serie A connection. I think that he's still young enough to remain in the Serie A and continue developing. It's a league that he knows. It's a league that he's proven in, and changing to go to the Premier League is obviously, you know, it's a big change, and it's one that it would represent some risk for the player. What I do find strange, though, is, like you said, like I find it hard to believe that Arsenal went as far as making an official bid for the player without feeling out what Vlahovic or his representatives were thinking.
Yeah.
Because although the proper way to do business is to go contact the club formally, submit your offer, get your response to that, and if you're given permission to proceed, you then speak with the player. That's the right way to do it, right? But we know that's not how it works. We know that people have informal conversations all the time. And the thing that kind of allowed me to get sucked into this idea that we might actually pull this off was the fact that we'd supposedly made this offer, that there was confirmation that this offer had been made, at least from Fiorentina's end. Yet apparently we'd not heard from the player. It just sounded weird to me.
Yeah, that's what, and this is what I'm talking about. I think it's strange that you wouldn't have sort of sounded that out before you went in and made this guy your top target. And it just seemed like at this current time, it just seems like there's not enough time left between now and the end of the window. I mean, there's literally less than a week for us to get that marquee striker in, which is why I think you've been hearing noises about the alternatives and about the loan deals and sort of ones that are coming out of nowhere, because ultimately we wanted that striker to help push us towards fourth. But when you don't get your top target, do you then sort of settle and go for someone that wasn't top, or would it be viewed as like they had a top 3 targets and they wanted all of them, maybe 2 slightly less than the first, but still acceptable? I don't know. It seems like if we're talking about Isak, like that sort of money, is that the sort of deal that you rush into in the January transfer window? I'm not really sure.
Yeah, interesting. Difficult one to make sense of. Let's circle back to the brilliant insight that Jonas brought us at the beginning of the show. Based on what Jonas has had to say, Luka Jovic, Alexander Isak, Raul de Tomas, who are you kind of leaning towards as your preferred option?
Well, yeah, I mean, even before that, when I was saying to Jonas as well, when I sort of looked into it and the sort of profile of the striker and the striker that I think that we need, I always did lean towards Isak a little bit more than Vlahovic. I just thought that with what Arteta wants from his centre forward and what Lacazette has been doing this entire time, that he's been playing as number 9, is really, even more so focused on build up play and linking up play.
It's really specific,
and
isn't
hold
it?
up play.
It's really
It's so specific to the point where, like, he's not scoring. Is it because Lacazette is not the most clinical finisher, or is it because of the role that he's been given? There's so much build up play. I think it's more than that, than him actually being in the box. So if you're asking someone like Vlahovic to do that, he probably could, like, in time. But as Jonas was saying, it sort of seems like Fiorentina, the team is built around him because he is the star man. He's the guy that gets all the goals. But at Arsenal, I don't really think that will be the case. I think we are very much a sort of system-based team that if you play in this position, you fulfill this role, and if you can't, you don't really play. And I feel like that's why Aubameyang, before the sort of captaincy debacle, why he was playing on and off. Like he wasn't playing every single game in a row because maybe Arteta didn't feel like he had the sort of credentials and skill set to fulfill the role that he wanted. Maybe he was doing it as a sort of short-term option until we got the striker and he wanted. But just looking at the sort of profiles, I feel like Isak, from what Jonas was saying, fits that a lot better. He was saying that he can sort of drift out wide, which is what we sort of see our strikers do sometimes. He's saying that he's great at link-up play, great hold-up play, and also great finisher. So if you're sort of picking a striker that can do what Lacazette can do, but adding the finishing ability, it sounds like you're onto a winner.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point that you make about Aubameyang and the fact that the specificity is, I fucking don't know what the word is, of that. But I've had a mare there of that role. It just doesn't suit him, and perhaps, and maybe I'm just painting this in a positive way so that we don't feel too down and sort of beaten up about it. Maybe we've dodged a little bit of a bullet with Vlahovic. Maybe it wasn't the right fit. It always felt like. It always felt a little bit uneasy at the fact that we were supposedly so interested and we were never getting anything back. That always felt a little bit uneasy for me. And obviously it's gone now and we need to turn our attentions elsewhere. We're going to take a short pause for those of you listening on the audio platforms for a quick message with regards to our sponsors, Athletic Greens. Welcome back to part 2 of the Chronicles of a Gooner, the Arsenal podcast, part of the 90 Min Football Network. As ever, I'm your host, Harry Symeou, and I'm delighted to be joined by Metro Sports' Mike Stavrou. Mike, let's move on a little bit from transfer targets from the players that we've been discussing. Mikel Arteta, spotted in the States with the Chronicles, watching a game of hockey. Lots of talk in the last couple of weeks about him potentially signing a new contract. Lots of talk about what Arsenal need to do in the transfer market. What do you think the purpose of Mikel Arteta's visit to the States was ahead of the trip to Dubai?
Do you think he's just a big hockey fan, Harry?
Highly doubt it.
I don't know, mate. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, it sent social media into a bit of a spin as it usually does. I don't know. It was interesting for me to see because I don't think there's been like much contact between, especially Stan and Arteta that we've seen anyway. We know that Josh has obviously got a lot more. Josh Kroenke's got a lot more involved in the sort of organisation of things and in his director role. But to see them two together was a little bit strange. What they were discussing, I mean, that's the $1 million question, isn't it? I mean, with it being so close to the transfer window, and judging by what Arteta's been sort of talking about in recent weeks about, you know, us being short on certain options in midfield specifically, him saying the other day that deals have been complicated. You've got to think that he's bringing up transfers. Like you have to think that he's saying, "Look, Stan, look, mate." Like, he's probably not calling him mate. He might not like that too much. But but he's probably saying, "Look, the squad, I have taken it not as far as I can, but I have done my absolute best with this squad. It's light on areas, and if you want to take this club back into the Champions League, and this is a good opportunity to do so because you've got teams around you that, if you've got new managers, are inconsistent, or you know, have similar or / worse squads to you. Talking about West Ham specifically there, but this is a fine opportunity. Well, one that you don't really get because the top four has been so competitive in recent seasons. We've not been anywhere near it. This is the chance. You have to think that he's saying to him, you know, back me here, and I can deliver you top four. Because if we finish outside the top four, even though I think we agreed at the beginning of the season, top six was fine. When the opportunity comes about, you have to really, really take it. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see.
This is the kind of the discussion that I've had a lot over the last few days, because for me, Mike, your objective is your objective at the start of the season. And yes, you can adjust that, but it doesn't, you know, depending on what other teams do, which I believe is the reason we're in the hunt for the top four, more so than us having dramatically improved. I honestly believe that. I think that we have improved, but I think there's more weight to the fact that Manchester United and Tottenham and West Ham at times have dropped points. All of those guys are sort of leaving the door open. That's what makes me feel like we have a chance of finishing in the top four this season, more so than our actual progress. So now, if we do miss out, I would be a hypocrite, and I don't believe that I would be fair in saying, well, a fifth place finish now is unacceptable off the back of the way things went. Equally, though, while the opportunity and the chance of finishing in the top four is there, you've got to aim for it. But that doesn't mean that we should beat the club and the players and the manager and everybody over the head if we miss out on the top four narrowly, right? Challenging for it is still above and beyond what most people thought Arsenal could achieve this season.
Yeah, and I think, look, any sort of situation can be skewed to fit your agenda. And I've seen some people suggesting on social media, if Arteta doesn't get top four, then he should be sacked. Well, I don't really think that's how it works. That's not really going to happen. Let's be honest. It looks like the Kroenkes are absolutely behind Arteta and the Arteta project. So first of all, that's unrealistic, but that's also unfair because if you were one of these people that was saying it's really difficult to get into the top four, and then when you don't make it, yes, the competition has not been as good as you expected, but if you don't make it and then suddenly you want the manager sacked, it doesn't really make much sense. But I just do feel that I would still be even though I'm in the same boat as you, and I think that our target is top 6, and I'm not going to be upset. I'm not going to start calling for the manager's head if we don't get it. But I will be disappointed because at the end of the day, like when the opportunity presents itself, it's down to the team, it's down to the manager, it's down to the club to ensure that you make the very best of that opportunity. And we're here in this situation with a midfield that's light. It's 1 or 2 injuries away from disaster essentially, because we've seen what having Partey and Isak Raul has done to us in recent weeks. It's not really enough to push us, and if we suffer a few more injuries, then we're screwed. And then up front as well, we're not scoring enough goals at the moment, and those goals that we were relying on in midfield, like Emil Smith Rowe, he's obviously been out injured or not been playing. Martinelli's not been banging them in recent weeks, so you're once again relying on young players and they're not consistent. So what you need to do in that situation is invest and get that top class striker or someone that's on the cusp of becoming top class to really push you forward. And I feel like if they don't do that, that's going to be a huge disappointment. And almost I could ask you, like, if they don't sign a striker, considering how much that we've heard that they really wanted one, is that them almost saying, oh well, like we're content not finishing in the top 4 now, and they're almost kissing their chances goodbye? Because it does feel like that a bit.
It does, but on the other hand, and it goes back to what we were talking about earlier on when we were touching on Luka Jovic as a potential player to come in. Do you want to see Arsenal go out and essentially splash any resource that might have been otherwise put aside for the summer to bring in a player that they're not totally convinced on? Because I don't. I think that over the recent years we've done that too often. We've panicked and we've gone and bought players that weren't fit for purpose and spent the subsequent years then trying to move those guys on and having a problem doing so. So I think that there is a want for a striker between now and the end of the window. There is a need. There is a desperate need, in my opinion, to bring in a striker by that time. But what bringing in a striker that you don't necessarily feel is the complete right fit does is it wastes resource, and in my opinion it damages the project. And I've said this time and time again, and I stick by this. I think that the idea was always that in the summer we'd go out and go big on a striker, and only because of what's happened with Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang have Arsenal accelerated those plans. And yes, you can accelerate them where possible, but it still doesn't mean that you can afford to be irresponsible in the transfer market. And where I feel like now, we had a really good summer in terms of recruitment last season. I think there's a real reluctance in Mikel Arteta and Edu to go out and bring players in that they don't believe are all in or the right fit for this project. And that will frustrate fans because we'll look at the squad and we'll see it being thin. But we're a self-sustaining club. We were always going to go through this phase of being thin at some point to then start to rebuild the squad again. We can't afford to have 35, 36 first team sort of standard players in and around the club. It's just unsustainable. So we were going to have to go through this regardless. And I just desperately don't want to see Arsenal go out and say, here's £40 million because we need to patch up this position for now, and then in the summer not be able to get the people that we really, really want or need.
Yeah, I definitely don't think it should be a sort of botch job. I think that would be silly, and that, as you say, it would sort of undermine everything they've been trying to do, essentially, from doing these, deals that have not really worked out. The big money deals. I'm talking about Willian, I'm talking about Pepe. I think they want to avoid those sorts of deals. But I just think that there needs to be something, whether that's, and we talk about like alternative options, and I think like I would trust the club if it is true that they were looking into the likes of Isak and Jonathan David and Calvert-Lewin, which are some of the names that have been coming out. These are players that have been linked with us for quite a while. So you think that if they're doing the I can't speak now. Due diligence. Due diligence, yeah, that's the one. If they're doing that thing, then you would like trust them to believe that they're the right player and the right profile. And when that sort of top target doesn't quite come through, that's sort of what happens. It's just a shame that it's sort of come out so publicly that we've really been wanting Vlahovic, because maybe if it happened a bit more behind the scenes and we were sort of considering between a few options, then signing someone like Isak and going for him wouldn't have seemed like a sort of rush and wouldn't have seemed like a huge deal or like a panic. But yeah, I actually do agree with you. I think this sort of centre forward, this long term, young, expensive striker that we're after, it has to be done right. It has to be. You can't afford to botch it. You can't afford to get someone that you're sort of unsure about. But I would say if the club are happy and fully convinced by the likes of Isak, then they should put the money on the table and go and get him, because the money that you could potentially make by getting in the Champions League will be huge and probably offset the difference in between what you'd have to pay in terms of premiums in January rather than what you have to pay in the summer. It's just that it just depends on how high up their list he is. But I think if they can't do that sort of deal and they can't get the exact player that they want, I think they have to bring in a loan player. There has to be some sort of middle ground. So I know Jonas was talking about Jovic and he's how he sort of his ego and how it's not really worked out for him at Real Madrid. I think that is something to consider, but also on the other hand, I think sometimes it's a risk worth taking. I think he's a player who's still young. He's 24. He's obviously got talent. I think players like that will want to prove a point. I can't imagine there are players out there sitting there at 24 years old and wanting to sit on the bench. I mean, I don't know. So sometimes it's worth taking that risk, and you just hope that it will turn out like Odegaard.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Let's take some of your questions from the live chat box. We'd love to hear from you guys as well, and we'll do our best to answer some of your questions. Just a quick reminder, if you haven't done so already, please do hit that like button. There's over 350 of you watching us live right now across the multiple platforms. We've only got 86 likes on the stream. Let's get that up to at least 150. That should be more than achievable. Make sure you subscribe to the channel if you are new for more Arsenal and football related content as we build up to the end of the transfer window. We'll be counting down the days and we'll be keeping you across all the big Arsenal news with some additional streams, extra streams coming up on transfer deadline day itself, although hopefully we'd have done our business by then and we don't have to stress too much. But please do show us your support, and if you'd like an opportunity to feature on our members podcast, you can do so by joining up. All you need to do is click on the link in the description, or if you're watching via your PC, you can click the join button below and you can join us. So we'd love to have you get involved. Mike, let's attack some of these questions. I should say. Soul Checker, I'll take this one because it's Italian football related. It says, why do you think the Italian-based players are so reluctant to move to the Premier League? I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, here, or if you disagree, I think there's a massive snobbery among Premier League fans to other leagues. I think obviously the Premier League is where the money is. It's where the coverage is. It's the place to be commercially. But the Italian league has an incredible history, heritage. The clubs are huge, well supported. Football is everything. It's just as important in Italy, if not more, than it is here. And I think a lot of people that grow up outside of that Premier League bubble still appreciate that and still value that. And although, in terms of where they are competing in Europe, they're not right at the top of their game. Having said that, they won the European Championships. Italy is still a glorious place to play football. The lifestyle, everything is just top. And I think that we as Premier League fans sometimes look and say, well, why wouldn't you want to come here? But actually, there's a lot more to just the Premier League, isn't it? It's about the lifestyle. There's so much to it, right?
There's a lot more to life as well. I mean, like if you compare somewhere like, I don't know, the Italian Riviera to Hull. I mean, I'm not saying that Dusan Vlahovic was ever, on the cards to go to Hull, but I'm just saying in terms of the landscape, I mean, like where would you rather live? I mean, it's not even a question you'd ever have to ask someone. So of course the sort of lifestyle comes into it, but I think for Vlahovic, there's a lot of value in taking that move and not jump in to too high. I think because you look at what we was talking about Luka Jovic. He had a great season at Frankfurt and then has gone to Real Madrid, and it's not worked out. I think sometimes these players need to take moves that are steps up, but not huge, massive steps up. And obviously he's playing well in the Italian league. So I almost think like, why would you at the age of 21 go and get that big move where the pressure is going to be doubled? I don't really understand that sort of mindset. But in terms of Serie A, obviously you'll be able to tell me more, Harry, but it's a lot slower, isn't it, than the Premier League? You get a lot more time. And for someone like Vlahovic, I think that suits his game because he doesn't seem like the most, sort of, he doesn't seem like that sort of player that's going to dribble past loads and sort of, create chances for himself. So I think a slower game suits his style of play. Obviously, like draw comparisons to Romelu Lukaku. He was absolutely smashing it at Inter, like doing so well, and then he's come back to play under Thomas Tuchel at Chelsea, and it's not quite working out. So you can draw them comparisons and see how really difficult the Premier League is. But of course, the lifestyle comes into it as well.
Yeah, big time. Sports Genius says, Harry, what do you think of going for Adama Traore? He changes the game and can create for our front line. He's, of course, been heavily linked with a move away from Wolves during this window to join that lot down the road. Mike, Adama Traore, he's a player that has been talked about for years, but he's never got that big move for whatever reason. Since he left Barcelona, it's always kind of been, people have wondered whether he can go back to kind of that highest level. Wonderful athlete, in my opinion. Not the greatest footballer in the world. What's your take on Adama Traore, and would you consider?
I wasn't sure if you were going to say Spurs was the big move then.
Nah, no chance. It's a
downgrade. So I was going to say,
come on,
exactly. Yeah, exactly. No, yeah. I mean, I've seen Spurs fans like absolutely so excited that they're signing, or they look like they might sign Adama Traore in January. I'm just not really sure. I'm not really convinced whether he's a winger or he's better as a wing back. I mean, he scored 1 goal for Wolves this season. So you're not really signing him to score goals. He doesn't really get loads of assists. And then I'm wondering, well, like what is it about him that you like? I think the good thing about Traore is that he creates chaos and he can create space for other players because he's such a powerful runner, and technically he's actually quite good as well on the ball. So I reckon that would be the only reason you'd sign him. But for me, for Arsenal, he just doesn't fit what we need. We are all about like technicians, I think, in this team, or that's what Arteta wants, I think, anyway. So I don't really think it would work out.
No, me neither. Big hello to Karen Russell, who says, I'm getting increasingly worried that the Arsenal won't do any business in this window. What do you think? And can you give me any hope? Look, I don't know that anything is close. I'm not claiming to be in the know, but I am quite confident. I would say 7 out of 10 confident that we will get some business done between now and when the window slams shut on Monday. Mike, where are you on that kind of 1 to 10 scale?
Yeah, but that could be like a backup keeper. So
yeah, it could be.
you're not really pushing the boat out with that prediction. So I think we've been linked with an American keeper as well, haven't we?
Yeah. Turner.
So I mean that could, Turner. So I think that could be the business that we do, and people will cry. But look, I think while it would be hugely disappointing if we don't sign an outfield player from now until the end of the window, I just maintain that January is such a difficult month to do business because clubs do not want to lose their best players in the middle of the season. They have objectives as well. Even though we're looking at the top 4, those clubs that we're buying from will have objectives, and they need their top players in order to reach them objectives. So if it doesn't happen, I'm obviously not going to be happy, but I'm not going to cry about it.
No, good stuff. Let's take this one from Peter. I love these tactical questions. I love these. It makes me want to do a whole tactical video. He says, do you think Arteta's preference to playing 4-2-3-1 with Martin Ødegaard as the number 10 and then Laka as what looks like a false 9 type, do you think that's hindering the team? I would argue no. And the reason I would argue that is because actually, if you look at, let me see if I can get this up actually while we're talking about it. If you look at the positions that Martin Ødegaard primarily takes up, they're not central positions. His starting position here, this is great to be able to have this at your fingertips. Let me just share the screen for those of you watching on the video. Don't worry if you're listening on audio, I will explain. But if you have a look at Martin Ødegaard's heat map just here, you will see that he predominantly picks up positions on the right-hand side. So what he does is he goes out there and he either doubles up with Bukayo Saka, or with Lacazette dropping that bit deeper and Ødegaard pulling out to the right, it means that Saka can drift slightly in field and get closer to the penalty area. So I actually think they really complement each other well. I think the drawback to that is that at times we'll work the ball into the middle of the penalty area and there won't be anybody there, because Lacazette, despite Ødegaard being in a slightly deeper role, is still looking to drop into that hole as well. So I think that's the drawback of it. But I don't necessarily think it's a negative. I just think it's a characteristic of the way we play. What's your take on that, Mike?
Well, I'm not going to answer it anywhere as well as you, but yeah, I think that Ødegaard dropping into that position is basically what we need, because we don't have the sort of midfielders behind him that are operating in that role where they're going to play people into space and create chances, and we need him to drop into that deeper position and to that position on the right or on the left or wherever it is in order to do that. And obviously as well, I think that the reason why he does that predominantly on the right is because Kieran Tierney is a big outlet on the left. So while Tomiyasu stays back as right back, Kieran Tierney, creates a lot of chances on the left-hand side, whether they're good crosses or not. That's not Ødegaard's issue, basically. But yeah, I think that's definitely a tactical ploy. I think the sort of problem that we have is that Lacazette is tasked. I guess it would be similar to a false 9 role, because a lot of his game is sort of link-up play. But the issue that we have is that the players that he's linking up to are all young players. Who's been scoring our goals in recent months? It's been Martinelli, it's been Smith Rowe, it's been Saka. And when those players aren't on form, or when they've hit a bit of a wall, or whatever the reason may be, they're not on song that particular day, we don't score. So I don't really think that's actually the fault of the system, or that's the fault of the players, Ødegaard and Lacazette. I just think it's where we are at the moment. What you really want is that player who can do both in that centre forward role, and I just don't think Lacazette's quite the guy for that, which is why we're so desperate for a striker.
Completely agree. Let's take this one finally from Wesbird. Do you feel that the club will now hold fire on a midfielder until the summer and we'll just try get in a striker? But if we don't sign a striker, will we still make the top 6? So I expect the priority now will be a centre forward, but there are reports doing the rounds today that there is still interest in a couple of midfield players. Bruno Guimaraes being mentioned, Gini Wijnaldum being mentioned as well. I just think that the sensible thing to do is, given the fact that Partey, Xhaka, El Neni will all be back by the time we're next in Premier League action, and obviously Lokonga's an option, I think the sensible thing to do would be to focus our energy on bringing in a forward. I think that's the greater need now. You could argue at the start of January we needed a midfielder, but we've gone through the worst of it now. So why bring in a stopgap who's maybe not up to the level? If we don't get a striker, I still think we can finish in the top 6. Not sure we can finish in the top 4, though, would be my answer. Just going to take this final one, super chat from Joe Kerr. Thank you so much, mate. If you're wondering why I keep glancing to the right, I've got the African Nations match between Senegal and Cape Verde on, and it's all popping off, which is why I keep glancing over to the right. So I do apologize. But Joe says, is hoping with Eddie, Laka and Pepe and Oba better long-term business than trying Juve for Melo and Devan K on loan? Is that Dejan Kulusevski, I think?
Kulusevski, I think.
Yeah.
Tough
go on.
question.
I'll let you take this one, Mike.
better long-term business? Well, I'm not sure about long-term business because Eddie and Lacazette are out of contract in the summer, so we don't know what's going to happen with them. Aubameyang's future looks uncertain as well. So I think ultimately you have to, if you do harbour ambitions of getting into that top four, you need to bolster the squad. And I think because Aubameyang, I'm not sure if he's gonna play anytime soon. You need to bring in cover for that position, which is why we're talking about striker. Melo and Kulusevski, I'm not 100% sure. I think Artur could be a decent sort of signing, but as Harry says, the sort of need for a stopgap midfielder was in January, so to bring him in now maybe doesn't make much sense. I still think we could do with an extra number in there, but you'd want it to be someone who would be challenging for a first team spot. Otherwise, there's literally no point getting them. So yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, good stuff. Right, we are going to leave it there. We've been going for nearly an hour now. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Thank you for your comments. Thank you for your interaction. And thank you for staying with us. Really good numbers on the live stream again, which is fantastic. But we're still 30 odd likes away from hitting that 150 target. So let's do that. Let's try and get there between now and the end of the outro. Mike, thank you so much. As always, let people know how they can follow you and keep up to date with you on social media.
Yeah, it's on Twitter is probably the best place. I post links to my articles and general musings about Arsenal. Mostly when they win. When they lose, I sort of get a bit like angry and like tend to switch Twitter off for a while.
I just
so
hide.
yeah,
I'm just gonna start hiding.
So not good for us in the month of January where we didn't win a game, but usually it's good. So yeah, at Mike_Stavro is where you can find me.
Brilliant stuff. Make sure you give him a follow. Make sure you give Jonas Yeva a follow as well. Our brilliant guest at the start of the show to give us the download on those La Liga-based transfer targets or rumored transfer targets. Please do check Jonas out as well on social media. We'll be back very, very soon with more Arsenal-related content. Until next time, take care.
You're listening to the Chronicles of a Gooner, the Arsenal podcast.
I'm Martin Tyler, and you're listening to Harry Symeou.